Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 28th of April 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the key on the video. At the moment, thanks to JR who has done the mapping for today. Again, what a legend. Right, when we look at the map, we can see that there are these pins that are now turning up on that northeastern access from Kupiansk to Svatova to Crimea. So we'll pop in to see what's going on there. There's also activity in the usual places at the northern part of Avdiivka and as well, I think that's Krasnohorivka there, just north of Mariinka. Before we go to the individual places on the front line, I just want to give you a bit of a synopsis of what General Syrsky has been saying. So he's obviously in charge of the Ukrainian war effort. The Euromaidan press had summarized his claims recently. So Syrsky says Ukraine retreats from 3 settlements, gains an island as Russia aims to seize strategic initiative. Okay, so I'm going to read this out to you because I think it gives an idea, at least what the commander-in-chief is saying. Ukrainian forces have retreated from 3 settlements in Donetsk Oblast: Bedichi, Semenivka and Novomerkilivka. So that is, just to let you know, and we'll go and look at this all individually again. So we have Bedichi is in this area there, so they're not in the Bedichi, and Semenivka as well. So that is to admit that the Russians have got control over Semenivka, the other side of the Derna River, as well as Novomerkilivka here, which has now fallen under the full control of the Russians. So that's Syrsky admitting that much there. And then saying that the retreat was done to preserve... Oh, sorry. He does then go on to say they have taken control of an island near Kherson, although we'll come on to that later. Syrsky said that the retreat was done to preserve the lives of his servicemen. He believes that while Russians have achieved tactical successes, they have not yet become an operative advantage. According to the commander-in-chief, the most difficult situations in the west of Avdiivka and Mariinka, where Russian attempts to develop an offensive with up to 4 brigades, and their goal is to break through to Pokrovsk and Korokhove in the Donetsk Oblast. So when we are looking at the Avdiivka area, they are trying to break through to this town called Pokrovsk, which is a fair way back from where they are presently at the northern point of Avdiivka, well, the Novokhanyovo and Ocheritina, although we're going to look at pronunciation there in a little while. So Pokrovsk is quite a way back compared to further down by Mariinka, where Korokhove is somewhat closer and much more in the Russians' grasp there if they go for it, and that's certainly been an objective they've long held. According, the situation at the front has escalated. In an attempt to seize a strategic initiative and break through the front line, the enemy's focused its main efforts on several areas, creating a significant advantage in forces and means. The article continues, after capturing Avdiivka in February, the Russians continue to advance, pressuring the Ukrainian military with artillery and air power. According to the spokesperson for the Khortytsia military unit, the Russians are storming Ukrainian positions in the Avdiivka sector around the clock. Currently, the hottest battles are taking place in the village of Ocheretny or Okretina. According to Voloshin, the Russian army is trying to break through the Ukrainian defense with 4 brigades. The reason why I keep pronouncing it several ways, I've had some of you on my thread saying you should pronounce it like this: Ocheretina or Ocheretny or whatever. But actually, not whatever. I mean, I don't often know because it appears that Ukrainians pronounce it in different ways. This is reporting from Ukraine, which I believe is a Ukrainian himself.
Of the Russian spearhead towards Okretina.
Okretina, so he calls it Okretina, so I don't know. Anyway, I digress. So the Russians are attacking along an entire front line, says, according to General Syrsky, and certain positions change hands several times a day. In the Luhansk Oblast, that's further up north, Russian forces are attempting to take advantage of their superiority in air power, missiles and artillery ammunition, their main objective being to reach the administrative border of the oblast. So that is Luhansk Oblast. If we then go further to the north here, you can see this dotted white line there, hopefully a little bit clearer on the screen now if we zoom out. So the Luhansk Oblast line, it goes along here, and that is somewhat achievable for the Russians. They should be able to take that, so they would want to, just to give you a slightly clearer view of what they would want to do in order to take the whole of Luhansk. That's all they need to get the rest of Luhansk. Donetsk is a whole different kettle of fish and presents a much larger challenge for them, but Luhansk is certainly doable in principle. Sursky reports that the enemy is concentrating their efforts on the Kupiansk direction, particularly in the villages of Stalmakivka and Berestova. Despite achieving partial success, Ukrainian units managed to halt the Russian advance. So those are towns that we haven't heard too much about recently. Stalmakivka and Berestova. This is up the eastern, this northeastern front line. So you got Terny, Torska. You come up past Nevska, Makivka. It talks about Russians being in Makivka, but I think that's unlikely. And up through to Stelmakivka up here, which is almost in line with Svatova. Although, and Brest up here, there is a lot of talk about Kislivka, but I haven't really heard Brestova and Stelmakivka being mentioned. So it's interesting that they are in Sursky's comments there. In the Liman direction, Russians continued their offensive to the village of Terny, or on Terny, attempting to push the Ukrainian defense forces beyond the Chorny-Zherebets river, but not succeeding. So that's to say that, they're still trying to push further to the west in this salient to the west of Crimea, trying to get to the Zherebets river that sort of follows that course there. They got over the Zherebets in this area, but they haven't succeeded further to the south, and they would really like to get here. They've been trying hard, but they have lost quite a bit of equipment and personnel in so doing. In the Seversk direction, Russia is attacking near Bilohorivka and Rozdalivka, aiming to break through and block the Seversk to create conditions for further advance on Sloviansk. However, Sursky states that the enemy's progress has been stopped. And there is some better news coming in Serebyansky for us, or at least, it is, as Sursky claims, that they have halted the Russian advance there, although it's been some pretty horrid fighting over the last few months there. It just goes somewhat unnoticed because people find it very difficult to geolocate in that area, but it doesn't mean that things aren't happening, and it's been pretty difficult for both sides. A lot of fighting around the Bilohorivka area here, and the Russians would find it very difficult to get down in this area because of the river and the mountains there. So really they want to be coming in from the south, which they seem to be trying from the Zolotorivka direction, and that would be their way of taking Bilohorivka. So he mentions that area too, and he says the hottest points are in the Kramatorsk direction, and they remain Ivanivska and Chaziv Yar. The enemy is also trying to regain control of Klishchivka and reach the enemy line across the Seversky Donetsk canal, Donbass canal. So that is coming down to Bakhmut, where we have Chaziv Yar here to the west of Bakhmut, the canal that comes down here. In fact, I don't think I have the roads on here. No, I don't. Here you go. So you've got the canal coming down here, and that is where the Russians are trying to get to, and then across. And then the claim is they're also trying to retake Klishchivka. We haven't heard much at all from Klishchivka recently. So he's talking about a number of places that have gone fairly quiet recently. Sursky noted the situation remains tense in the south, in Zaporizhia and Kherson Oblast. The enemy is attempting to advance in the areas of Staromyorsk, Robotina and Verbove, and still hopes to push Ukrainian forces out to Krinky. However, they have not succeeded in any of these directions. Moreover, Ukrainian units have managed to advance in the area of Veletenska and establish control over Nistraya Island in the Kherson direction. The Ukrainian defense forces have also improved their tactical positions in the areas of Sinkivka and the Serebyansky forest. So, this is just what Sursky is saying, that the Ukrainians have consolidated positions around Sinkivka near the forest area near Kupiansk. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. And as he mentions, some successes in the Serebyansky forest. And then also mentions an island in Kherson that I have not heard mentioned at all previously. So this is the island. Where are we? In the river delta of the Dnipro River. It's this island there that apparently the Ukrainians claim they have control over. As you can see, it is not in the Russian defensive line, and I don't know what either the mapper has as far as grey zone here and then Ukrainian control, but Syrskyi is certainly saying that that island is under Ukrainian control. And quite often with these islands, you don't realise, but there are settlements on them, small sort of fishing villages and whatnot. I don't know about this particular island. It doesn't look like there are any buildings on this imagery on the island. There might be the odd stranded building here somewhere or another, but yeah, I can't possibly something there. Certainly the other side, no, I don't think there is. So it looks like that might be an uninhabited landmass island to some degree there, but that's under Ukrainian control as according to Syrskyi. So there you have his views. The Institute for the Study of War has given their own impression about what's going on in their daily report from yesterday. I'm just going to read some of the headlines to you, which is the Russian forces will likely make significant tactical gains in the coming weeks as Ukraine waits for US security assistance to arrive at the front line, but the Russians remain unlikely to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses. In other words, it's looking like it could be a difficult couple of weeks for the Ukrainians. Well-provisioned Ukrainian forces will likely be able to prevent operationally significant Russian advances during Russia's expected summer offensive effort, although Russian forces will nevertheless leverage select advantages and adaptations to pose a significant threat to Ukraine this summer. In other words, as Russia supposedly builds towards the summer offensive, I'm somewhat dubious about their ability to commit to a decent offensive, but it might be that they're just going to try with everything they've got. And the idea is if the Ukrainians are well provisioned with equipment from the US and other allies, that they will be in a much better position to be able to stop any major advances. There are talks about Kharkiv again being on the cards. I'm not too sure about that. Ukraine is very likely to stabilize the front lines in the coming months and may be able to begin limited counteroffensive operations in late 2024 or early 2025. That basically, that bolded statement there, one sentence, is caused quite a lot of people to go, oh, the ISW has said that Ukraine are going to be able to do a counterattack this year. I think it's not quite as certain as that. It's very likely to stabilise the front lines in the coming months and may be able to begin limited counter-offensive operations in late 2024 or 2025. I think people have really overcooked what the ISW said there. And as a result, I haven't actually reported any of that to you. But over the last few days, over the last 24 hours, since this kind of came out, lots of people have been talking about that. Russian forces are continuing to exploit a tactical penetration north and northwest of Avdiivka and recently made additional confirmed advances in the area. And that's in the Avdiivka area. We'll return to that when we get to the mapping. And then it talks about the tempo of Russian offensive operations is currently higher in the Avdiivka direction than near Chasiv Yar, even though Chasiv Yar is recognised as one of the main areas that they certainly... I think it was the opportunism of the 115th Brigade not being there and the 47th having to step back in the Ocheretny area that has led to Russia swiveling to taking advantage of that part of the Avdiivka salient and kind of focusing away from Chasiv Yar. And I think that itself tells you they don't have enough to do both, particularly. Russian forces are likely to intensify offensive operations near Chasiv Yar in the coming weeks. However, as Chasiv Yar provides Russian forces with the opportunity for more operationally significant advances. So that's what it says about there. We're going to go first, though, to north. We will return to those paragraphs in a second. We're just going to go to the Kupiansk area, where, as you can see, there are some changes to the front line in the Kislivka area, which is just north of the Tabaivka Krokmalna area, where the Russians did have some success some weeks back. Here we have some small gains into Kislivka, but it's significant because we haven't really seen any gains here for a long time. Kislivka and Kotelyrivka haven't really been in the news for an awful long time. What do we have here? So we won't get to that. We kind of talked about that. These are the claims that Syriac map has. The Russians continue advancing in Kislivka and took full control over the eastern part of the locality, thus reaching the northern outskirts of the Kotely Rivka from that axis. So that is having success in Kislivka, which is this area, not yet in the western areas of the village, and Kotely Rivka down to the south. They're advancing close to that. Andrew Perpetua, not quite there yet, but it could be a difference in the timing for doing their mapping updates. And it could be just slightly more conservatism with Andrew's mapping there. And then we have Rebar talking about this area as well. The very pro-Russian source saying soldiers of the 272nd Regiment of the 47th Armoured Division of the Russian Armed Forces have established control over at least the eastern part of Kislivka and planted the Russian flag there. Apparently units of the 104th Brigade of the YFU's Territorial Brigade were forced to withdraw either to the west of the village or to the neighbouring Kotelyrivka. At the moment, Russian troops are mopping up Kislivka, but the situation in the western part of the village is still hidden by the fog of war. It's noteworthy that Ukrainian forces do not particularly believe in the preservation of the AFU control over the village and declare the withdrawal of the forces to the south. The control of the Russian armed forces, even over the eastern part of the Kislivka, significantly worsens the enemy's position in Kotelyrivka, which is already virtually semi-encircled. At the same time, occupation of the western outskirts of Kislivka will allow Russian fighters to finally close the ring, they say there. So going back to my map, that's to say that if they succeed in taking all of Kislivka, then of course Kotelyrivka will be under a lot more of a threat. Sorry if you hear background screams from my son. He's got a new game that I'm due to play with him after this video. He's desperate for me to play with him on that, and he is screaming like a banshee. Right, okay. As we come out of that northeastern area, although we need to dip into the ISW, Russian forces intensified operations northwest of Svatova, reportedly capturing Kislivka. And what else did it say? Russian mill bloggers claim that the Russian forces advanced up to 1.85 kilometers in depth along the railway line that runs through Kislivka. Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces have semi-encircled neighbouring Kotelyrivka, Ukrainian forces there. But the ISW has not yet seen confirmation of those claims. And then as we come down to the south, we come to the Serebyansky forest here, just by Kremina, south of the Terny Torska salient. And the ISW says that a Ukrainian sergeant operating near Serebyansky forest told The Guardian in an interview published on April 27th that Russian forces have a 5-1 artillery advantage over Ukrainian forces in the area, which the sergeant described as more or less stable as compared to other intense areas of the front where Russian forces have up to 10-1 artillery advantage. So that's to say, yeah, it's pretty tough there. They've kind of stabilised. The Russians have a 5-1 advantage in artillery, but at least it's not a 10-1 advantage that they have in other places. So yeah, tough. Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back possibly in the in this area of the Bilohorivka sector. Now, this is interesting because Andrew Perpetua says that there are Ukrainian gains and that Ukrainian infantry are in a trench at this position. Well, if Ukrainian infantry are in a trench there, that is really a fairly significant change in what is going on there, and tells you that the Russians almost certainly don't have control up as far as here, which is what Syriac Maps has got. Andrew Perpetua, less, the mapping is very different there, far less risky mapping with the Russians a lot further back. And indeed, this would therefore be grey zone, and then the Ukrainians pushing into Russian-controlled territory there. So that's, I think, fairly significant, because that does show that the mapping is potentially very different to what Syriac Maps has under Russian control there. Right, then when we come down to Chaziv Yar, we can go back to the ISW. No other sources to dip into, but I am going to go to the ISW that says, in the Chaziv Yar section all the way up here, that Russian forces have recently committed roughly a division's worth of combat power northwest of Avdiivka, which has lent them roughly a... Oh no, that's the I thought this was, no, we are getting onto Chasiv Yar, which has lent them roughly a threefold advantage over Ukraine's available combat power in the same area by unofficial Ukrainian estimates. Russian forces have committed roughly doctrinal end strength and relatively doctrinally consistent formations in the area where Ukrainian forces have struggled with under-resourcing, which has allowed Russian forces to achieve tactical gains in the area north and northwest of Avdiivka over the course of the recent weeks. Russian offensive in Chasiv Yar direction, by contrast, has significantly slowed over the past week. What I think, and it's interesting here that the ISW says that they frequently assess that Russian forces have struggled to conduct simultaneous large-scale offensive operations through the war, but have more recently been able to conduct shorter alternating offensive operations in offensive pulses. I think that's exactly what's going on here. So it seems I talked to you about how Chasiv Yar's been very stable for some time, and then it sparks up down here, and I say, well, Novomykhailivka is stabilised. There's not a lot going on there, and Krasnohorivka then perks up, and then that goes for some time and then stops, and then Novomykhailivka will start up again. As I think, what does this tell me? To me, it says they don't have enough strength in depth, the Russians, to commit large-scale offensives to all of these areas at the same time. And what they do is they push and exhaust themselves, but they can reconstitute. The Ukrainians aren't in a position to push back. So while they, on a short term, take a breather, get supplies in, consolidate. So let's take Novomykhailivka, for example. They took this place, losing something like 320 pieces of mechanized equipment in this area. They took it all. It cost them tremendously. The Ukrainians also will have taken some heavy casualties, have pulled back, and the Russians then go, right, okay, let's take a breather. Meanwhile, they push up in Krasnohorivka, and then this goes on for some time. They're pushing. Then they run out of steam, and then it allows them the time around Novomykhailivka to sort out supply through here, build up some supply depots in Novomykhailivka, get their forces to filter through to closer to the front lines, and then they push again from here while they're taking that breather in Krasnohorivka. And I think the same happens in all of these places. They go in pulses because they are unable to just do that continually, to push continually. I really honestly think, and this is the same for both sides, neither side is in a good place to do long-term sustained attacks. I don't think that Ukraine will be able to do that until they mobilize big time. So I think Ukraine's ability to do large-scale maneuvers to take back huge amounts of land will not be able to do that. My guess is for another year. So the idea that they can do this late 2024, I think, is highly unlikely. But they say localized though, so I think they could probably do that in some small places. But as far as going on the offensive in a major way, I don't think so. So I think Ukraine will sit back and do lots of stuff with missiles and rockets and artillery and drones, and then reconstitute their forces, mobilize, train, get sorted out, have a sort of active defense. They're not going to completely cede all their territory, but they'll put up defenses. But the Russians will be made to work for everything. But being made to work for everything and not having enough equipment and indeed enough troops, quality troops themselves, they can only work in pulses in certain areas. The question is, while they're doing these pulses in certain areas without being able to pull on any kind of reserves, localized reserves, are the Russians building up reserves elsewhere? So there's still talk about Kharkiv and troops amassing possibly in the Belgorod region for a potential attack on Kharkiv. I mean, it seems that it would be odd that they do that and neglect to just put the necessary forces in to actually properly take areas down on the eastern Donetsk front. So I don't know why you would collect, I don't know, I'm pulling these numbers out my posterior, but say 50,000 troops up here to do something up there when the Ukrainians have dug trenches and done all sorts around here. Why you would do that rather than put 50,000 troops down here and just actually take the places you are trying to take, like Kurakove and Pokrovsk. That would be far easier to do than to try and take Kharkiv, which is the second biggest city in Ukraine. It just seems bizarre. So I think all of this just points to just not having enough to do any major attack. So it kind of leaves you wondering, what really are the proper Russian objectives here? Like the realistic objectives. So you can have pie in the sky objectives or what we're thinking. I want to know what the actual Russian commanders like Gerasimov, well, where is he? Is that actually trying to achieve? Anyway, sorry, that's just a lot of talk for myself. Some geolocations in the Avdiivka area. So we'll talk about Avdiivka properly now. With here, Mill bloggers claim that Russian forces advance into Keramik, although ISW has not observed that yet. Geolocated footage published on the 27th shows Russian forces have advanced in western Ocheretny and southwestern Solovyove, and into a tree line south of Novobakhmativka, which is to say that Keramik is this area here. You can see that Surrey map says that the Russians are in Keramik. Deep State map maybe on the outskirts, Andrew Perpetua not so, and ISW saying there's no evidence that that is the case yet, but of course, who knows, maybe later today. But as you can see here, Surat Maps is fairly confident the Russians have made huge gains all the way around that Novokalnyove area, and indeed around the east of Ocheretny as well, so it's closing in that gap somewhat. And then further to the south here around the Bedici area, all the mappers claiming that the Russians have pushed quite a bit to the west at the source of the river here. And of course, the problem is they get across into this high ground, or they're pretty much there almost, especially with Semenivka being taken, that the Ukrainians, I think, have now... I think this high ground and the use of the river, the Derna River, as a natural barrier have been compromised, and I think the Ukrainians will be pretty much thinking about or in the middle of pulling back to their major defences further to the west from there. And I don't think that would have happened if this cock-up hadn't happened around Ocheretny. So yeah, it's a real shame that. Some geolocations exist. So here we have artillery destroys Russian shelters in this position. So let's go and see where the Russian shelters are. The ISW did have quite a number of geolocations. I've only picked out two just to save a bit of time. So here we have, a Russian shelter that's in the western outskirts of Ocheretny. So that would confirm what all the mappers agree, that whole settlement is under Russian control, at least the main part, maybe not some northern areas over there. We have another one here saying that an FPV drone of the 47th Mechanized Brigade ends the lives of 2 Russian soldiers in a crater near Novobakhmativka and shows a destroyed BMP there. So the Russian infantry are here, but that they have also been taken out. I don't mean for dinner. So that is, it doesn't, yes, it confirms what the mappers have, or at least, the mappers are much further on from there, so I wouldn't put too much store in that. Geolocation, and another one that I'm pretty sure is going to be fairly nearby because it sounds like it's from the same footage. So we've got a BMP right next door. It is pretty dynamic in this area. The question is whether the Ukrainians can halt that. There was talk about stabilizing yesterday, and I think it looks like it stabilized around Ocheretny, which is kind of what they were talking about, but it seems fairly dynamic around Novokalnyove and further to the south around Bedici, and this is to me the more worrying of the Russian gains, because I think that's them coming in from the north more properly. And that is, there's just one more gain down here. We go to the Institute for the Study of War. Don't know that there's too much more to report in there from their daily report. So that's the north. And most of the rest of it is positional. There is a little bit around here, around Krasnohorivka, that the Russian forces are beginning to clear the brick factory, according to some Russians. But the ISW is saying there's no visual evidence of that yet. Of the Russians maintaining positions within the brick factory. So this is, the brick factory is, I think, here. I think that is it. So the claim is that some Russians are claiming that they are in that area, but there's a denial there from, unless it's not that area. No, I think it is that's a brick factory there. Anyway, that's what the ISW says, so not too much there. The Surat map saying that the Russians have made some small gains there in the middle of Krasnohorivka. And as I've said to you before, although there's a difference between the mappers there, this is about Russian control. And if there's that change that Surat Maps is making, it's likely that there's some video evidence of Russians in that area. The question is always, do they robustly control that area, or is it grey zone where they're getting, loitering munitions hovering around them the whole time, they're getting hit by mortars and whatever, and it's pretty dynamic. That doesn't mean it should be Russian control, and that's probably the same for a lot of this area there. But the Russians are pushing in Krasnohorivka and having some success there. Anyway, that's the end for the Frontline update. I thought I'd just hit you with some of those analyses from the ISW and from Sirski himself to give you an idea of what's going on in the larger scheme of things, zooming out a little bit, but also with an eye on tree lines and buildings and whatnot across the front line. Anyway, let me know what you think. Take care. Speak to you soon.